Hello, what's up?
You gave your heart to me and you said it was mine.
Shout out our boy Jay Roddy, as always. What's going on, Corey? Welcome back to the Circle Club. We are talking Loki. What's going on?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Glad to be back. Episode 2, another solid one.
Absolutely. Listen, man, where we are right now, feel like we didn't do too much. We didn't get too complicated with it. We didn't get too crazy. They gave us just enough to be, curious and just enough to be interested to move forward. We got a little plot progression with our boy Obi here. The one thing for me I felt was a little rushed was Sylvie. I kind of felt that was quick. Kind of happy though that they did it that way, so we don't have to kind of sit in that. Like I would have hated if we would have sat in McDonald's land too long. You know what I mean? But I'm happy with it. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're building Sylvie to be a little bit more of an, enemy towards Loki this season. But I think inevitably towards the end of the season, they're going to end up coming together, right? Like I think that's just obvious. So not seeing too much of her was good to me because I think it establishes that distance between them, even when she sees him, right? Because when you saw in the first episode her like kind of gazing at the couple, you're thinking, oh, like, did she make a mistake? Is she missing him? And apparently, like, it's the complete opposite, right? So it kind of sets the tone for how that relationship's going to be coming into the season, because that's not what I was expecting, honestly. Like, really was not expecting her to be like extremely mad at him and to take him wanting to think about it in that moment as seriously as she did. So there's clearly like a miscommunication between them going on, and it's like frustrating on her end, clearly.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I didn't expect that. Like she was really cold, bro. Like it was like very cold, and it kind of it was giving me kind of bitter X energy, and like, but at the same time, it was kind of like I love you, I like you so much that I can't even be around you, kind of thing, I just kind of felt it was too quick how she was like so fast to like jump back with them. And like Loki obviously made a great point of like, listen, Sylvie, if you don't come with us, well, this world doesn't even really exist. It just all happened a little too quick for me. And I think maybe if she wasn't so mad, I would have been more accepting. Why is that? Why do you think it is that she's so upset at him?
Because I think it just goes back to the cores of being like the core values of being El Loki, right? Like they can't really trust. So I think our Loki is the one who has overcome those flaws clearly. Like even within the scenario with Zaniac in this episode, where Mobius is like putting on the whole spiel, like, oh, like Loki, you don't need to do this, similar to like the first season. It's clearly like a plan by them, right? Like Loki has kind of overcome this individual, and it probably explains why he's able to time slip in the TVA, right? And they'll probably explain that later on. But for Sylvie, she's still stuck in that character, right? So she hasn't really broken free like Loki has, which makes sense, and why she doesn't really trust him at this point, because she feels like he's up to something at the end of the day.
Right. And when you look at the end of season 1, where she makes that decision, they both sort of have this moral crossroads that they come to, where it's like Loki's kind of like, hey, what if he's right? What if he who remains not lying? And she's kind of like, everyone's a liar. I don't trust him. And that's what he who remains even says to Loki. He's like, can she even be trusted? Like, can she trust anyone? Is she capable of that? Right? So far, he who remains has not lied to us. One thing about him, manipulative, sure, but has he lied to us? Not really. I don't think so far. So we shall see. We shall see. I liked how we introduced this episode with X5. He's like living his life as an actor. He's kind of doing his own thing. I thought that was cool. But the interrogation scene was fire to me. I thought that was dope. Morbius kind of loses his cool. That was kind of nice to see him have a different side. But Tom Hiddleston, bro, like when he finally decides I'm done playing games and his face changes, I was like, ooh. Because, like, Loki at this point, like, would you consider him more hero or villain?
I would definitely consider him more hero, honestly. Like
Yeah.
like the reason why I say that is because when you look at like a hero and a villain, like there's obviously a fine line between how your perspective is on what they're doing, depending on what side you're on. But I think a
Sure.
hero inherently has good motivations behind him, right? Like, and when Loki's motivation is to ensure like free, like in a sense, like he's not just like he's kind of lost in the sense of knowing what's wrong and trying to find the pathway forward for what is right. And what he knows is wrong is that you can't like take people's free will, but he
Right.
also doesn't want billions and billions to die, clearly based on the end of the episode 2 and what they did, right? So
Yeah.
like he's trying to find the best pathway forward for the best of everyone, going back to why he feels like He Who Remains might have been the best path all along, right? And he's trying to
Right.
question whether they opened up a pathway to that better path or whether it's just going back to what it used to be, right? Or sacrificing
Yeah.
someone.
And that's interesting to me because it's like I thought this season we would have gotten He Who Remains a little bit faster because we know it's only like 6 episodes, right? But I kind of like this approach. It's almost like the TVA is divided on this issue. Like, they're like some of them are kind of like, yeah, we didn't have free will. I don't know what my old life is, but like this is now my life. I've been living it. It clearly is a necessary sort of thing that we need, right? So then you have people who are kind of split amongst this like free will versus, things are just what they are kind of society. But yeah, I think Loki is a good guy at this point. A little bit, he's kind of tethering that Wolverine line of like, hey, I do my own thing, bub. And like, and so that moment where he's interrogating X5, that was fired at me because he kind of brought out that like, ooh, I've been good for too long, and as a Scorpio, you know how it goes. You're like, man, people they play on my kindness too long, and it's a wrap. It's a
Yeah.
wrap, and that's kind of how I
Yeah.
felt Loki was treating it.
Totally. And I think when you think about just that scenario with X5 and him pushing back on Mobius and Loki saying like this isn't real, right? Why don't you want to go back to your timeline, right? And I think the evidence of the TVA being very much real is the fact that OB is even trying to like say that they're all gonna die, like the scenario that they're in being locked in. X5 himself being so concerned he's about to be wiped off the map if this
Right,
box exposes a little too much. So
right.
I think it still begs the question of like, where is the TVA? Like when and where at what time is this happening, right? And I think it begs the question still of like, are we within the loop or are we on a pathway that might get us back to that loop? And I think it poses like one of the things that I'm most interested in that we knew at the end of last season, but they're like
Yeah.
really exposing now is with Miss Minutes. And it's like, I think
Yes.
the loop begins with wherever Miss Minutes is now. And I think that is the original He Who Remains. So is it Victor Shackley, who we've seen within the trailers, or is it somebody else who's the original He Who Remains, right? And I think
Yeah.
those origins is what's going to establish like a lot of the who is the good guys and the bad guys because
Sure.
of the Kang persona itself and how
I
it becomes created.
Yeah, I feel like, unlike Thanos, where we kind of sit there, or even B. Jordan's character, you
Killmonger.
know, thank you, Killmonger, how there was like this moral sort of compass, but you ultimately like, yeah, they're bad guys. I think with Kang, we may see something different where it's like it's not as clear, right? Because it's like the like what Kang is trying to do is necessary, right? And so you have to almost sacrifice something, or some universes will be sacrificed. So I think that's going to be a very fascinating component in these next phases. We also got to see a little bit too of Loki. His magic game has stepped up. When he had X5 on the wall there, that was dope to me. Where like he was using the shadows and stuff. What do you think of that?
Oh, I love that. Like one of the things that people complain about all the time in Marvel is the people that are too OP and like people that don't use their powers when they could, right? Like, and there's a lot of complaints about powers, and I love that Marvel kind of established here, and Loki even addresses it. Like, yeah, it's not a fair fight. Like he doesn't even have to say it, but like,
Right,
dude, I'm a
right.
god. You're just like a human variant that got pulled into the TVA. Just because you got that little device doesn't mean you're
Right.
more powerful than me, right? Like, we're not
Yeah.
within the TVA where you're restricting my powers. So
Yeah. And you hit the nail on the coffin. It's without them saying it, Loki's just the entire episode. I kind of felt Loki was kind of like, I mean, if I wanted to, I could wrap this up. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
I love that.
exactly.
I love that.
Exactly.
Speak of which, you mentioned the temp pad. It's altered. We don't know what it does yet, right? So we're still trying to figure that out. Obi kind of takes a look. Casey steps in, who's like and that was a kind of a funny moment too, where it's like he's such a big fan of the TVA guidebook. He gets to meet the creator of the guidebook. That was kind of funny there for me. What do you think this altered temp pad does, man?
It's clearly something that's more advanced than a regular temp pad, right? So like, what do we know about a temp pad already? That you can tap in, go to basically any time, any place, anywhere. So what would this allow for on top of that? Other than it basically being like the TVA's Pokédex and letting you know all this like historical information and what happens, right? So I think it must allow him to hack into other temp pads. And I think and the reason why I say that is when you think about how they described it in here and what Loki was saying, what Mobius was saying to Loki is Loki took the stance that Sylvie hid forever. She has the trick of the trade of hiding. Now she has the ultimate temp pad because she has He Who Remains temp pad. Like, you should, in theory, never be able to find her, right? And X5 just being, even though he's a really great hunter, like, he shouldn't be able to find an individual who is clearly proven that they can't be found, right? Especially while chaos is going on. How are you supposed to find her? And the only thing that logically makes sense to me is that his temp pad is hacked in some way that he can now access other temp pads and where they have gone at the end of the day. I think that's the only thing that makes sense.
It's like a tracking device almost.
It's like reverse tracking based off them using the same technology in a sense.
Right.
He has access to them because they're technically using probably some type of the same network, and because there's chaos, there's no way to like stay on top of him because you don't really have the IT staff cooking right now, right? IT's OB, and OB's really determined,
jammed up right now with the temporal loom.
Right? He's tied up. So
yeah. No, I think that's a great theory. I like that theory a lot. Speak of OB with the temporal loom here. So we find out that this door, the blast door, I think it was called, is stuck. Only way we can get it open is the original creator. So we know the original creator is He Who Remains, right? Yep. He Who Remains is technically gone, kind of, right? Unless we get a variant, right? So talk to me about that. Like, what are your theories on how we approach this season to solve this issue?
Yeah, so this is an interesting part to me, right? Because I think this answers a critical question to what's going to draw that line between what is good and what's not good. Because as of right now, right, like there is a question up for debate. Like, is the sacred timeline the right choice, or is it free will and letting just like chaos ensue the right choice, right? Like, initially you think chaos and all these universes fighting, like, you can't allow that to happen, but you're also just creating a story and not allowing people to be who they are and make those choices at the end of the day to ensue chaos, right? And I think when it comes down to this series, it's really gonna have to establish what is that right choice here, right? And there's a lot of sacrifices going back and forth, and it's, again, going back to like the political things, like it's very like reflective of what's going on today, because a lot of people are cheering what's the more appropriate thing without looking at like the root causes, right?
Sure.
And it just
sometimes we look at the reaction before we look at the cause, right? And I think and I think sometimes too that's kind of and like Marvel's always tapped into these things. They know what's going on. You know what I mean? And so they're always sort of commenting without commenting.
And this
And
is and this is how I think they can establish that, right? Because what they established in this episode is that you need the creator's temporal aura, right? So so you don't need this, like, it's what is that temporal aura? It's not this, it might not be representative of the same face or that same person, right? So you probably can't, the way you can establish that truth and what is the right thing is by basically establishing that the only person that you could get is He Who Remains, and He Who Remains is dead. There's only one specific individual, because the temporal aura is unique to that individual, right, on that timeline, and there's no copying that, right? Which then establishes that you need to have the multiverse because everybody is unique, right? And if you are able to pull out a variant, then in that case, you're making the case for the sacred timeline, because they're all really just one individual spaced out through all these different variant inversions of their one true self. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. And like that's sort of what I mean, like where it's like this season we're gonna have this dilemma about should we keep the TVA or not, right? And I mean, when you look at what General Dox's plan is to kind of go rogue, right, and get and purge some of these or prune some of these timelines, it's like like General Dox, what you're looking to do here is that much different than what He Who Remains is trying to do. You know, like you're still putting the decision in your hands, right? You're still kind of taking control and doing something about it. And how and what makes you the decider of who gets to stay, who gets to die, who doesn't get to make it? You know what I mean? And I think He Who Remains was kind of doing that, and honestly, not even comfortably, because at the end of season 1, he's like, this is not a burden that I would even want. Like, I don't want to be doing this. This is now up to you. You're relieving me of my duties, right? So that's gonna be very, very. It's a tough sort of side for people to pick.
Yeah, it's a tough dynamic because they're going off the dogma and the status quo. Like they don't really truly know why they're doing it, even though the truth has been exposed, right? So like it's hard to follow somebody who's not truly a leader and is just following orders from something else that clearly has been called into question, right? So it makes it difficult for, I think, somebody who actually thinks and is self-aware and is conscious of their decisions to follow like an individual like that. And that's why you're getting the Mobiuses, the B-15s following Loki, because they know that they got to figure out the right path forward, right? Like they haven't really found that answer. They know that the TVA as it currently stood is not the right thing, but they also aren't sure if having a sacred timeline is that right pathway forward, right? Like they're still trying to figure that out at the end of the day.
And that's a great segue. So, you know, this episode, I'm thinking about, Renslayer a lot, right? And so with Renslayer, what we see here is Renslayer at the end, Casey sort of tracks where Renslayer's temp pad is. And so, you know, we know that she's out there. Like we got some connection going on. She's found, right? And we also know that Renslayer is working with essentially He Who Remains, right? So we saw that last season. We know that Miss Minutes and Renslayer are working together. So, you know, is it necessary that the TVA has to have someone like Renslayer who is also working with He Who Remains to kind of create that balance, to take those orders? Do we get that from one person? You know, is it some sort of democratic system? Like, I don't know. Like, what are you thinking about everything with Renslayer right now?
I honestly think like a lot of people who are like super tuned in with the MCU are overthinking it, right? Like let's take a couple steps back as a general audience member. Like you probably don't know the comics, you probably don't know the ins and outs, you probably don't know or watch a lot of these types of videos, right? So excluding all of these individuals who know these things are watching our own video right here. There's people out there that don't do those things and don't know those things. They have no idea that Renslayer is Kang's love interest, right? And they really haven't established any type of relationship there other than this audio recording, right? So this is a way for them to start establishing that this isn't just about Renslayer going to seek out who's in charge, right? It's way more complicated than Renslayer basically being like the General Knox or whatever her name is.
Yeah.
Right?
No, General Knox, yeah.
There's a clear difference between Knox and Renslayer, right? Because at the end of the day, Renslayer is something more than what Knox is doing right now. And they're using
General
Knox,
Knox,
as Dox, yes, thank you. Dox as the initial upfront season antagonist, so to speak.
Right.
While they build up the evidence that it's really Kang and Renslayer who are now our bigger threats to try to take over the TVA, right? And that is the bigger problem than Docs themselves trying to just continue the status quo, because the status quo is not going to be the status quo if Renslayer and Kang get the TVA. It's going to be way different, because remember, He Who Remains, we have to take it in the context as being the good guy who ended it in all time, right? The good version of Kang. So we're looking at the bad version of Kang taking over the TVA, which means a completely different type of TVA at the end of the day.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a great point to mention there, is that, you know, things have been good and clean and smooth because we had the good version that took out those other versions. So now we're going to see the bad version of Kang come in here. And so, and you know, that approach is going to be very interesting to see how some of these other TVAs are running their operations. And yeah, like I like you said, I just think that them showing the dynamic and the contrast between those two styles is ultimately going to be kind of what our heroes, our Avengers, you know, have to kind of face with. Like, you know, do we have some sort of system where we have a good Kang, or do we have a system where it's chaos, and things are going all over the place? And I kind of lean towards the latter.
Yeah, I think they've shown a little bit of it though too, and like again, it goes back to the time slipping, right? So like He Who Remains, I think clearly didn't win in the very beginning. I think he had come along afterwards and then won and then created this, because the evidence of it to me is again the mural in that boardroom, right? There was a Kang there before. So that to me means there was a Kang there who clearly had the egotistical opinion of him being better than everybody to throw his face there, versus He Who Remains used a more shady Wizard of Oz behind the mirror aspect to project that it's not really this one guy who made this whole decision, right? It was a collective, it was a unit, right? It was more a consensus. Like it's easier thing to adopt because it was what was needed, right? And the way they projected the three timekeepers was like a godlike entity, versus it just being a man named He Who Remains who really won, but he used that to not project himself as the conqueror, right? Not as the ruler, but as just the keeper of time, really, at the end of the day. And he didn't need that marketing, that projection and branding to need that to happen, right? And that's the evidence of me being the good one at the end of the day.
Yeah. Now, at the end of this episode, we get Sylvie. She's kind of gone back home. She's going back to McDonald's land, which I call it. And, you know, she's decided that she is going back to Oklahoma, right? She's done. She's going to do her own thing. What is her motive right now? What is Sylvie thinking? You know, kind of like what do you feel that is her purpose? Because for me right now, I'm like, is Sylvie sort of useless with this crew? Like, because she has a different motive, right? So maybe she's just not really of use to them. Like, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think Sylvie was giving Loki the opportunity to prove her wrong, right? And I think in that moment, it is what steered, especially when Loki was trying to prove her wrong, but also prove something to her that like she needs to help and like be on their side. he is putting her on that path that he saw of her in the future, right? Where she was basically the destroyer of it all, which again reposes the question, are we on the loop or not at the end of the day, right? Like, is it all meant to happen and part of the story? And I think Sylvie is meant to restructure this group's thinking again into how they can find that better pathway, because she's of the sentiment that no TVA is what needs to be done, right? And I think the version of any version of the TVA is going to be some shade or seeds of Kang itself, right? And a version of Kang. And that's where you need Sylvie to kind of help you find that other pathway that's not of those shades and of those things, because that's kind of like the Hydra thing, right? Like, you're still infected using the same thing. The whole aspect of the Nazis incorporated into the West, right? Like, you have to find a new way forward without like latching on to what was ultimately foundationally problematic.
Yes, no, exactly, that makes sense. And so, I mean, what do you think Sylvie's ultimate purpose is then? What is her purpose?
I think Sylvie's ultimate purpose, and it goes back to like that temporal oral aspect of like proving that the multiverse is what's needed to have free will, and just that's what it should be. Is Sylvie's purpose is to help ensure that the loop actually does break. She's like the Daenerys of this series, and actually trying to break the wheel, so to speak. Whereas Loki is still, again, like, we know Loki's a good guy and he's trying to find the right path forward, but again, he's still teetering. He's using the TVA, but he wants the TVA to be good, and he's still wondering like who should be in charge. Is it He Who Remains? Like, that question's still looming in his mind, so he needs to still break out of that, right? And I think Sylvie's that one that's the only one that can convince him to do that, because of the emotional tie-in he has with her at the end of the day.
Right. So she's just, she's locked in that it can't be Kang, and Kang's not the right decision, and she sort of wants essentially for him to kind of wake up and be like, dude, like, if this is gonna happen, it can't be through this way.
Exactly. And the evidence of that though too is at the end of the episode, right? Because the TVA, people within the TVA are the ones, even after Kang is gone, destroying those timelines, destroying those universes, right? So she's like, look at what I'm looking at, right? Like, even after we killed the guy at the end, they're still doing the same things. So like, this needs to go. Like, this whole thing needs to go, because the technology behind offing those timelines comes from Alioth, which came from Kang, which came from the TV, which is with the TVA. And as long as the TVA is around, that's going to happen. These things will still happen.
Now, how do you think they're going to incorporate Sylvie into that? Let's talk a little bit about episode 3. What do you think they're going to do in episode 3 to sort of establish that, okay, Sylvie's starting to join the band a little bit here? That she's like that, because if we only got 4 episodes left, how is Sylvie going to be incorporated in that if she's in Oklahoma?
Yeah. I think it's a telltale sign of like the guy trying to pursue the girl, right? Like, I think Loki's going to need to get a little bit more evidence, a little bit more build up to make his case to have her help him, right? And get him on his side. And if that's not going to happen, and she doesn't come with him off that instance, then we clearly have a branch off point where Sylvie is becoming like the actual enemy again, right? And you got to remember, like, when we first got introduced to Sylvie in season 1, like, she was posed as the enemy, but like instantaneously with our protagonist, who is Loki, like, they kind of like hopped on the same team together, right? He walked through the portal with her, so we really haven't seen a bad Sylvie yet, because Sylvie has always been with Loki at the end of the day. Even though they were fighting throughout it, they were on the same path together, right? And it was a path of apparent creation by Kang at the end of or He Who Remains. So now this is true free will. So we'll see who is Sylvie. Is she a bad guy? Is she a good guy? Is she like this middling ground like Loki has played at times? We will find that out. And I think this is her projecting her true self within the season, versus last season maybe not really being who she really is.
I think last season it was more about her being a survivor, right? Like, how do I survive this? I need Loki or this guy. It could have been anyone, right? How do I survive? I think this season has been a lot more about, like we said, the TVA being split morally, but also who these characters are, where they stand, where they fit with these things, right? And I think with Sylvie, we'll see that, and like you said, we're gonna really get to find out who she actually is. Now, as I was watching this last episode, it started to make me wonder, think, is there any sort of potential or reality? So what the Avengers, everyone's got their role, their spot, right? Obviously, Loki's gonna, I think, join the Avengers this time around. So is the villains gonna have like their Loki, and that you think it's possible that it might be Sylvie?
Dude, it could be possible. Like I can't imagine them having, like, let's say, a super villain team with like let's just throw like names like Red Skull,
Yeah.
like maybe potentially a Doctor Doom, Kang, etc., and like on that team, not have a Loki. Like you can't not have the God of Mischief on there, and the only way you can have that there and kind of do what you're gonna do here, where you kind of have shades and parallels on both sides of characters, throwing a Loki versus Loki or Loki versus Sylvie more so into that, dude, you really like you kind of need that. And like it's always gonna leave the audience too in this like build up to the end of Secret Wars of like, are they gonna make that turn? Like is it gonna be the Sylvie finally swinging to the good side, or does Loki inevitably just swing to the bad side, right? Like who knows? Like it's not like that Jamie Lannister, Cersei Lannister going on, where like what's gonna pull them in which direction at the end of the day. And as long as JRR is right in it, we might have got
it. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a great place for us to be in, where it's like, will they, won't they, as far as their relationship, but also will they be bad or will they be good, right? And that keeps us on our toes, because I think at this point we really, really, really like Loki. We think Loki is a good guy, but as we saw, he still has that shades of like, I still got that dog in me.
Listen,
Loki still got that dog in him. Don't sleep.
Hey, for all my WWE guys or WWF back in the day, nothing is greater than a heel turn. Okay, nothing is better than building up to be the baby face, building up to be the good guy. Everybody loves you, and then Loki does the ultimate Loki move that we should have seen coming from the beginning of the entire series. He stabs you in the back because he's God of Mischief, and like. It's a Hollywood Rock return to the WWE, right? You thinking he's coming back, he's finally back, and all of a sudden he's the bad guy. He's better than you now. He's a millionaire. He's not the people's champ, he's the Rock's champ, okay? And he's Loki's champ. Glorious purpose.
And that's a great point, because at the end of season 1, we got that. If you think about it, it wasn't our Loki who stabbed us in the back. It was the new Loki that stabbed us in the back. And so, our Loki is the main Loki, the one, And so I think to have Sylvie become that character would certainly be interesting. I think they're even making her a little bit, I don't know if so far in first season 1, I liked her. I thought she was a nice blend. This season so far, just getting those hints, I'm like, I'm not loving her. I'm not sure if I want her to be on the team. And it's purposely done, right? They're separating her from the crew. It's because if we get too attached, but we want her to be a good guy and involved, then when ultimately she makes that shift, we may go, no, you're a villain. So and the way Marvel does villains, it's not kind of like a gray area where you're like, oh, like for example, Killmonger, probably the closest gray area we've had. And like, but ultimately, at the end of the day, Killmonger was still morally just a corrupt bad guy. And that's what Marvel does. So if Sylvie becomes a bad guy, it's gonna be because she did something that was morally irreversible for us. Where we're like, no, you're bad. And I could see it being her killing Mobius, maybe, something like that. Something to just really make us go, you're done, Yeah,
100%. I think there's no coincidence that within this episode, X5 is out there calling Loki a villain. Just be a villain. Just be antagonize him. There's some foreshadowing there, right?
Totally.
They don't just put that in there to put that in there, right? Like they even 100%. Got you wondering if he was gonna jump and do that this episode. And I even was like sitting there like, yo, he might do it. Like, it's not it would not shock me if he did it. He didn't do it here, right? But he could most definitely do it later, right? And I think that's the best part about this show is like as Loki progresses, the more and more you feel like he's a good guy, is the more and more you should feel like he's gonna flip, because that is inherently his nature. And it goes back to what I say: are we in a story still? Because if we're still in that circle, if we're still in that sacred story that he has going on and he has cooking, then Loki is going to turn at some point. It's just a matter of time, right? So I think they're doing this good, like I said, the Memento, really Christopher Nolan, like making you really think about how this is going to play out. And I think the space within the TVA allows you to really dive into that type of a project too. So
definitely. And I think that, you know, if Loki ultimately decides to become a bad guy or flip on us, that would be really like, whoa. But at the same time, if he stayed true and beat the odds, because that's what Lokis are supposed to do. So if he beats the odds, that's even doper too. So like really, it's almost like you're in a win-win situation here.
100%.
Like I think as long as we keep it clean and, you know, more like it follows the moral track and sticks to like the foundation and root, I can see a future where Loki even sacrifices Sylvie for the betterment of you know, the universe, and his brother and his mother, all that stuff. If we get the mother to come back in the scene, bro, that's gonna go crazy. That's gonna be wild. But all right, Corey, man, anything else you got here before we talk about a couple little Marvel upcoming things?
Yo, my man, you hit every single note I had and didn't miss a beat. So when you hit that, you know you're asking the right question. So I got everything off my chest after this one.
Beautiful, beautiful, and that's why you guys should subscribe, because you know this is this is the man on the street sort of thing here. You know, the common man. This isn't, you know, hey, comic books, you got to watch all 30 movies. We keep it straightforward. What you see on TV is what you get. We're not bringing in all this extra influence. What you see on TV is what you get. Corey, man. So what we got for upcoming from Marvel? So the Marvels right around the corner, November 10th. That's going to be a very exciting project. Obviously, Deadpool early next year. And then from there, that's when we kind of get things rolling. But the Marvels is what we have next. That King Dynasty isn't for a couple years now. Do you think, just final sort of statement, do you think anything involving Loki is going to sort of potentially affect the Marvels?
I think no. Honestly, like I really think the Marvels, especially after the first, I expect something similar, right, to what we got with the first Captain Marvel movie, right? It's going to be really standalone on its own, and it's going to find ways to tie in through some of those aspects, right? Like they use with Nick Fury and Shield, right? Like they're going to play off of those type of things, but it's going to really, I think, play off of Shield because of Monica Rambeau, right? Sword, because of Monica Rambeau and the WandaVision. So I think it's going to help prop a little bit of those series up. Obviously, it's going to help prop up the Miss Marvel series that happened. So they're going to have those obvious tie-ins. But I think on its own, it's going to be its own entity, if I'm being honest. I think if anything, Miss Marvel series will have way more of an influence in there than any other because of the whole dimensions thing. I'm hoping to see a little bit more on that, but if not, then it's really going to be probably us getting more information on Sword that we saw in the WandaVision series. That's what my expectation is with that project.
Funny enough, there's enough in this where you could pull from WandaVision, you could pull from Secret Invasion, you could pull from Miss Marvel. You know, so like this is the movie I think a lot of people are kind of sleeping on. Oh, I'm not going to watch. I'm going to pass on. But there really is a lot that can be tied from all these TV series with this. So this might be one that'll sleep on, that people may sleep on and regret.
Yeah, you just honestly just lit the light bulb in my head is like anybody watching this video is going to see, because my eyes just widened up as you were talking. Secret Invasion, that's a great call out, because you got to think about the whole Kree cause, right? Like they talk about the Skrulls being an infection, right? Like taking over these planets. Like you do not want them. And in the MCU, we've established the Skrulls prior to Secret Invasion as the good guys and the Kree being the bad guys, right? And I think coming out of Secret Invasion with the whole US, or the whole, not US, I'm sorry, the globe basically about to get taken over by Skrull leaders and things like that, poses like a debate to the Kree's like whole agenda against them, right? So where is that stance? Where is that coming to play? How much people know about what happened within Secret Invasion because of Nick Fury taking it up on his own? Is this really something that's still quiet, right? Or is it out there? Because at the end of Secret Invasion, from what I remember, they did release things on the news, and there was some that got exposed. So like, what happens within the stance to the Skrulls, because that is ultimately why the Kree were coming in the first place, right? So are they coming for this and then to get involved? It's a new dynamic within the whole Captain Marvel movie itself.
I feel like this is really that first step of like, I feel like we've been stuck in time with a lot of the series where they're sort of happening at the same time or right before, right after the blip. This is going to be, in my opinion, the very first major step forward in time. Because as you said, with Secret Invasions, that was such it was on the news. It was everywhere. Nick Fury leaves. He has his lover, all this stuff. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. Final question for you. Yes or no, my man? Oh, you got to go ahead. Say it. Yeah, I saw it in your face.
Pull that graphic up that you just had, because now that we're talking about the Marvels, when you look at that graphic and you really look at this lineup here, all the complaints people had, right, about things intertwining. The Marvels is going to connect the WandaVision, Miss Marvel, even the first Captain Marvel movie, right? You're going to get a lot of those things intertwined. Deadpool 3 is where I think you're going to get a little bit more of that Loki influence, of course, with the multiverse, the variants, et cetera, et cetera. So watch, and again, as the reports roll out, as like Hugh Jackman and Deadpool himself with Ryan Reynolds are supposed to be key figures within the whole Secret Wars movie. Deadpool 3 is going to start tying a lot of those shows in here to really build up to Secret Wars. And then when you think about New World Order, same exact thing with the Falcon and Winter Soldier, right? Like a lot of the things that have transpired throughout these series, I think are really actually going to come to unfold within these shows. And the Thunderbolts speaks for itself within these projects that have released.
Absolutely.
That game, right? So I think a lot of people's complaints, if these movies can hit, it's within the medium of being movies that Disney has thrived off of. If you can go bang, 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 you got a lot of excitement going into your big projects. And then you get one new project, one that's hyped with Blade. Doesn't matter what you tie in there. It's going to be the real, I think, kickoff.
Eternals. That's Eternals. That's going to connect to the Eternals.
Right? It's going to really start kicking off that dark world and some of the things you're going to start seeing a lot more of, I think, post Secret Wars.
By Night, all that kind of stuff.
I think it's your taste to life after Secret Wars is where Blade is really going to have a lot more influence, though. But it will have tie-ins to the things like you mentioned, Eternals, the Black Knight you had in that, so on and so forth. So it's exciting projects, honestly, to me. Right, we're starting to ramp up.
I think it's going to start getting good. I think this is definitely the time. I think Loki's a great entry point, too, if you've been slacking, to kind of start here, go back, start working on it a little bit. Everyone always says, oh, my God, it's such a commitment. It's 6 episodes, a lot of these shows. Seriously, 6 episodes. That, like, you guys watch Stranger Things and, this person married to this person reality show. It is 24 episodes. This is not a huge commitment. And I would honestly say, too, like, you don't need to either. Like, if you watch these shows, it's only going to enhance it, but you don't need to watch everything.
And honestly, they're really just extended cut movies. That's what you really got to think about, because a lot of these shows aren't an hour long, right? Like the episodes aren't an hour long. Some of them are
it may say 45. It says 45 minutes, but it's like
42. Yeah, it's not
really
even
40. Yeah, it's really
not
40,
even. So
39.
You're looking at like 3.5, 4 hours maybe worth of content. If you're watching this, I'm sure you've watched Lord of the Rings extended cut too. So there's no excuses to watch the series.
All right, my man. That's Loki season 2. Make sure if you're watching or you're listening on Spotify, you can check us over there. We will be going live either every Thursday, 10 p.m. Eastern. If not, we'll do it on a Friday afternoon, 5 p.m. Eastern as well. Corey, my man, any last thoughts here?
No, that's it. Episode 3. I'm excited. I hope they keep progressing. Just keep giving us more information. This is how you run a show. I always felt like Loki was the best show that they had released, so I'm hoping to see the trend continue as we progress here.
It's got a perfect amount of mystery, big names, not too big names, bringing other folks in. It's fun. It's friendly. It doesn't get too Disney, laughing, kiki, and it's just a great sort of balance to me, man. And I love it.
Tyrone.
Before you go there.
Go ahead. It's your channel.
I was gonna say no. Before you go there, I was gonna say, what is your final rating for this episode?
Okay, thank you. I was gonna say, I thought you were about to miss it. That was exactly what I was about to ask you what the rating was on this.
Okay. So, of course not. We're connected like that.
Everybody knows on my scale out here, I'll be going on a 10-point scale. I don't work on a 5-point scale. I would give this episode honestly a 7.8. That was a very good episode. Didn't think it did anything crazy. It answered questions. So I don't want to refer to it as a filler episode. We kind of had this debate offline. But I didn't think it wowed me or did anything crazy. So a nice solid 7.8 for me.
I would give it a probably 3.9. I was excited watching it. I just love looking at the show a lot of times too. I feel like it does enough where it brings you in, but doesn't give you too much. So you want something next week. I feel like when the episode ends, I'm not like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? But at the same time, I'm like, we got enough information where I'm like, ooh, what are they cooking? I know those final 2 episodes are going to be just because that's what they did the first season. And then it's going to make me want Loki season 3, which we may never get. But man, I love it. I love it, man. But all right, that's going to do it for us here. Corey, we already talked a little bit about what's next here, on the release, the Marvels. But yeah, what should people be focusing on over this next week with Loki?
Next week with Loki, I think you should just marinate in your thoughts. Think about what you feel like the ending is going to be, right? I think that's the best part of TV shows and what makes Loki so fun is there's a lot of possibilities right now. Marinate in what you've watched so far. Focus on what you've seen. Don't focus on external information that comes outside of just this series itself, right? Take the truths you've seen on screen and try to formulate your own opinion and then stick to that and see if it plays out. That's what we do. We'll be accountable if we miss it, but that's I feel like you're in a good point. Like you said, you have enough information, start formulating what you want, but you don't know everything where you can get excited and be excited for the next episode to see if your things come to fruition. So that's all
Absolutely. Next week is the halfway point. We're right there. But all right, that's going to do it. Make sure you subscribe. Check out what's next with Corey, and Corey's always on here, man, whenever. Shout out to my boy Jay Roddy for the music on the outro. And as we always say, just be you. Peace. And we'll see you next week.
She say I'm fucked up and she's not wrong.